Reading the news, presenting on TV, performing on television has always carried with it a level of responsibility. I think it still does. TV enters people's homes in a way that no other medium has done before. Unlike social media, the viewer remains more passive in that TV experience. So some of the reservations and the concerns expressed in the early days of TV, to me, still seem to be completely relevant. These concerns have become public, partly because of the ongoing discussion about breaking the glass ceiling and indeed about promoting the diversity of our nation through TV presentation. Challenging the authorities, holding people in power to account, giving access to the public. I remember Sue Lawley, I think, in 1983, managing a lady called Diana Gould, who questioned directly Mrs. Thatcher about the sinking of the Belgrano. And Thatcher was furious. Sue Lawley did her job then to perfection. This is when TV works well. Equally, the democratization of TV with the studio audience, with quiz shows, and later with the rise of reality TV. There are issues about safeguarding, but if we enter people's homes, we must expect and give the opportunity for those same people to have a voice, and the role of a presenter on television is partly to curate that voice, to be a representation of ourselves. And therefore there are standards. At the start, it was a debate about clothing. What sort of tie, what gender is acceptable to deliver the news, for instance, and just how entertaining should a news programme be. I was young enough to remember John Craven's innovation about standing in front of the desk. Itself, I think that was a thoughtful take when he introduced Newsround on the conventional classroom at the time. But now that peripatetic approach is built into the main newscasts and the main studio which is used for the BBC news broadcasts. I remember the shock, therefore, on Morecambe and Wise at seeing Angela Rippon's legs for the first time, beginning to give a weather briefing in the middle of the programme, some sort of news bulletin, which was a weather briefing on Christmas Day. And I remember she then broke into song, but where there's moonlight and laughter and love and romance, let's face the music and dance. And the desk itself sprang open. Shock. Today, there's a debate about sexism and ageism in the casting of presenters. But the BBC from the start was not like that. The BBC was seen as a progressive employer. And the careers of people like Mary Somerville, what's the name of the lady who did the children's television? Her name's gone. And she was responsible for Blue Peter, for Doctor Who and so on. Incredibly inspirational. Isla Benzie, Hilda Matheson, for example. They're all completely astonishing. But it wasn't until Nan Winton in 1960, and indeed, I think then a further 15 years later, that Angela Rippon and Sue Lawley gained parity for women on screen, as well as off-screen, as well as backstage. In this, I think ITV was probably ahead of the BBC with Barbara Mandel on Lunchtime on Lunchbox in 1955, and later Victoria Britton and then Anna Ford. But the reason that what happens on the BBC is important is that it has history as well as innovation. It's the conduit to the heart of the nation. And the BBC website is as central in the digital age as the 6 o'clock news was in the early 1960s, as the radio or wireless was during the heyday of the Second World War. A reassuring voice in the darkness. And When that reassurance is questioned, the nation wobbles. We're in a helter-skelter of wobbling at the moment. The death of Her Majesty the Queen, the collapse of confidence in, I was going to say in the government, but it's in Parliament in general. And now the spectre of a compromised BBC, compromised by government cronyism in the Richard Sharp scandal, an obsession with the doctrine of impartiality in the Gary Lineker scandal, and scandal itself in the business which has been going on the last few days. Actually, we need to focus on what matters, and that is the voice of reassurance. And how that voice is delivered has always been a central argument in the development of the BBC. The King will come to inhabit his own voice. A future government will speak with renewed confidence, and the BBC must be allowed to find its feet in this new century, particularly as coming up to its own centenary. And I think we should be very proud of the BBC, as we should be proud of the NHS, as we should be proud of our historical innovations, and indeed things like prison reform. We have so many things in the UK to be proud of, and I think the obsession with Brexit is clouding our judgment. We need to put Brexit to bed, get it done, get it over with. But we need to focus on what is important, and what is important is a spirit of fairness, a spirit of ingenuity, the spirit of embracing diversity, and giving people of all backgrounds a voice.